The Vesuvius 3000 gleamed under the fluorescent lights of my new garage, its aggressively orange chassis a beacon of raw, unapologetic power in the otherwise muted suburban landscape. I ran a soft cloth over its engine housing, a gesture of reverence usually reserved for classic cars or holy relics. It wasn't just a snowblower, it was a statement, a 357 cc, two-stroke, gas-guzzling testament to the principle that some problems don't need a delicate touch. They need overwhelming force. "You're a beautiful, beautiful monster," I murmured, patting its oversized auger. This garage, this house, this monster, it was all Grandma's. Well, it was mine now. 6 months ago, she'd passed away peacefully, leaving me her small but immaculate home in a neighborhood called Pleasant Valley Estates. The name alone should have been a red flag. Places named Pleasant Valley are either the setting for a horror movie or ruled by an iron-fisted homeowners association. Turns out, it was the latter. But at the time, all I saw was a future free from the tyranny of rent, thin apartment walls, and landlords who considered a functioning faucet a luxury amenity. I'm a graphic designer, which is a fancy way of saying I stare at a computer screen in my pajamas until my eyes bleed. The freedom to work from a home I actually owned felt like winning the lottery. Grandma was the one who taught me about tools. "Never buy cheap, Jake," she'd say, her hands covered in grease from tuning up her old lawnmower. "A good tool feels right in your hand. It does the job right the first time, and it lasts a lifetime." She'd bought the Vesuvius 3000 after a particularly brutal New England winter, declaring she was too old to be held hostage by frozen water. It was absurdly overpowered for her small driveway, like using a bazooka for pest control, but that was Grandma. Go big or go home. Now it was my legacy to uphold. I felt a deep, swelling pride. I would keep the lawn neat, the paint fresh, and the machinery humming. I would be a homeowner, a real, honest-to-God adult. My blissful vision of suburban tranquility was interrupted when I went back inside to unpack the last of the kitchen boxes. Tucked inside a drawer, beneath a stack of takeout menus from the 90s, was a heavy, spiral-bound tome. The cover was laminated, its title printed in a soulless Arial font, Pleasant Valley Estates, Homeowners Association, Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. Taped to the front was a small, crisp envelope. Inside, a note written in painfully perfect cursive. "Welcome to the neighborhood. We trust you'll find our community's commitment to aesthetic harmony to be a refreshing change. Please familiarize yourself with the enclosed guidelines to ensure a smooth transition. We look forward to your compliance. Sincerely, Carol, your HOA president." I hefted the book. It had the weight and density of a collapsed star. 200 pages. I flipped through randomly. Section 12, Holiday Decorations. All inflatable lawn figures must be deflated by 9 p.m. EST. Section 19, Approved Mailbox Colors. See Appendix C for authorized beige swatches. I laughed, a loud, genuine laugh that echoed in the empty house. It had to be a joke, a parody. I tossed the rulebook onto the counter with the junk mail. "How bad can it be?" I said to the empty room. The universe, it seemed, was listening, and it loved a challenge. 3 days of idyllic peace passed. I set up my office, organized the garage, and even managed to cook a meal that didn't involve a microwave. I was living the dream. On the 4th day, I found a plastic-sleeved notice taped to my front door. It was a violation, a $25 fine. My crime against humanity? Improper gnome placement, Section 8, subsection 4B. All lawn ornaments must be at least 36 inches from any public walkway. I stared at the notice, then at the offending gnome. It was a cheerful little fellow with a fishing rod, a gift from my grandma after a trip to the Poconos. He was nestled in a flower bed, a good 2 feet from the sidewalk. Who was tripping over a gnome 2 feet off the path? A drunk giraffe? My confusion turned to mild annoyance. This was the kind of bureaucratic nonsense I'd moved here to escape. I looked across the street and saw a woman on her hands and knees with a bright yellow measuring tape, meticulously gauging the distance between her prize-winning petunias and the curb. She had a visor pulled low and the focused intensity of a bomb disposal expert. This had to be Carol. Taking a deep breath and forcing a friendly smile, I walked across the street. "Excuse me? Carol?" She looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. They were the color of a cloudy sky and held about as much warmth. "You must be Mr. Miller, from number 12. Her voice was clipped, efficient. "That's me, Jake," I said, extending a hand. She ignored it, her gaze fixed on my face. I got this notice about my gnome." I held it up. 36 inches, Mr. Miller," she said, not as an answer, but as a final judgment. "The rule is for aesthetic continuity and to prevent tripping hazards for our power-walking community." "Right, but he's way over here," I said, gesturing vaguely. "He's practically in the window well. I think even the most dedicated power walker would be safe." I tried a little laugh. It died in the cold air between us. "The rulebook doesn't say about 2 feet or way over here, Mr. Miller. It says 36 inches. Precision is the cornerstone of harmony." She stood up, brushing dirt from her khaki capris. "We have standards here. That's what makes Pleasant Valley so pleasant." She gave me a smile that didn't involve a single muscle above her nose. It was a thin, joyless curve of the lips that communicated both welcome and threat. I stood there for a moment, dumbfounded. This wasn't a conversation. It was a sentencing. Defeated, I trudged back to my lawn, plucked the gnome from his happy little spot, and measured out exactly 37 inches from the sidewalk. I placed him down with a sigh. He looked lonely out there, a tiny ceramic castaway. I didn't know it then, but the war had begun. And I was already on Carol's list. A month later, it was time to address the one part of Grandma's house that was a genuine hazard: the back deck. It was a splinter-filled, wobbly death trap that looked like it would collapse if a strong-willed squirrel so much as looked at it. After getting a few quotes, I hired a guy named Gus. Gus looked like he'd been assembled from spare lumber and rusty nails. He had a graying ponytail, a permanent squint, and hands like leather work gloves. His truck, a battle-scarred Ford F-150, rumbled into the driveway, and he hopped out with a grunt. "All right, let's see the patient," he said, skipping any and all pleasantries. I liked him immediately. We stood on the deck, which groaned under our combined weight. "Yes, she's a goner," he said, kicking a support post that wobbled drunkenly. "Gotta tear it all down, start fresh. You got the HOA paperwork?" "Paperwork?" Gus stopped and gave me a long, hard look. "Kid, you can't just build a deck. You gotta submit plans. Get them approved by the board. By her." He nodded ominously toward Carol's house. "Oh, right, the HOA," I said, the word tasting like ash. "I'll get on it." "You do that," he said. As we walked around to the front to discuss materials, he eyed the neighborhood. His squint deepened. "Nice place. Quiet. You met the Queen yet?" "The HOA lady? Carol?" I said, a bitter edge to my voice. "Yeah, we had a little chat about garden gnomes." Gus let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. It was a grim, mirthless sound. "Kid, let me give you some free advice. I've built decks in neighborhoods run by saints and neighborhoods run by Satan's suburban sister. This here," he gestured around the pristine, soulless street, "is the second kind." He leaned against his truck. That woman timed my lunch break with a stopwatch last year when I was fixing the roof on number 7. Said my period of inactivity exceeded the 45-minute limit for commercial vehicles. She tried to fine the homeowner for me eating a sandwich. I stared at him, my mouth slightly agape. "Get your permits in triplicate," he continued, his voice low and serious. "Use the exact shade of wood stain specified in Appendix F, subsection 3. And for the love of God, don't let your truck drip a single drop of oil on her precious asphalt. She'll have it declared a Superfund site." He pushed himself off the truck and clapped me on the shoulder. "Good luck, kid. You're gonna need it." As he drove away, I looked over at Carol's house. I could see the curtain in her front window twitch. Gus wasn't just a contractor. He was a prophet. And he had just foretold a coming apocalypse of beige paint and passive-aggressive notices. Submitting the deck plans was like applying for a top-secret government clearance. I had to provide architectural drawings, material lists, a soil composition report I downloaded from a county website, and a signed affidavit promising the new deck would not disrupt the visual flow of the neighborhood's posterior facade. Gus was right. I was pretty sure Carol had invented that last part. Once the project was finally approved, after 3 weeks and 2 revisions, the first was rejected because my font choice for the labels, Helvetica, was deemed too aggressive. The real fun began. Carol's house became a sniper's nest, and I was her primary target. The violation notices started appearing on my door with the regularity of a morning paper. It began with the trash cans. I worked from home, often getting lost in a project and losing track of time. One Tuesday, the garbage truck came and went. An hour later, I remembered to bring in the bins. Taped to the lid of my recycling bin was a crisp, new violation. Fine, $15. Failure to remove refuse containers from curb within 60 minutes of collection. I saw her across the street, pretending to prune a bush that was already perfectly pruned. I walked over, notice in hand. "Carol, come on. I was on a work call. It was 55 minutes, by the way, not 60. I don't know why I added that last part. It just came out. "The rule is in place to prevent unsightly clutter," she said, snipping a perfectly healthy leaf. "Punctuality is a community virtue, Mr. Miller." A week later, it was the mailbox. My grandma's mailbox was a sturdy, classic model, painted a deep forest green. It had character. Apparently, character was a violation. Warning: unapproved mailbox color. Per section 14A. Property must be brought into compliance. Paint color, subtle taupe, Sherwin-Williams code hash 7508, within 14 days to avoid further action. Subtle taupe. It sounded like the color of sadness. The real flashpoint came when Gus and his crew started the demolition. The sound of power tools was, apparently, a personal affront to Carol. At 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, she marched over to the work site. I watched from my office window as she got right in Gus's face. I slid the window open to listen. "This level of noise is simply unacceptable," she declared, her voice rising over the whine of a circular saw. "It disrupts my morning meditation schedule." Gus slowly powered down the saw. He took off his safety glasses and wiped a sleeve across his sweaty forehead. He looked at Carol, then at the sun high in the sky, then back at Carol. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "It is 10 o'clock in the morning, on a weekday. This is, and I'm using the technical term here, construction. It tends to make noise. There is a provision for excessive auditory disturbance in the bylaws," she sniffed. "Is there a provision for common sense?" Gus shot back. She huffed, spun on her heel, and marched back to her house. Gus caught my eye through the window and shook his head, a wry grin on his face. Later that day, he started referring to her exclusively as the Beige Dictator. The name stuck. Every day brought a new, petty absurdity. A warning about the placement of Gus's portable toilet must be visually shielded from the street by an approved lattice structure. A note about the grass being a quarter-inch too long near the driveway. I felt like I was living in a psychological experiment designed to test the absolute limits of human patience. I was failing. In late November, the first real snow fell. It was a picturesque 6-inch blanket of white, turning the whole neighborhood into a postcard. Being a responsible new homeowner, I dug out my trusty old shovel, not the Vesuvius that was for the big leagues, and got to work. I cleared my driveway, my front walk, and because Grandma always did, I cleared the sidewalk from my elderly neighbor across the street, Brenda. Brenda was a sweet, bird-like woman in her 80s who had been friends with my grandmother for decades. She poked her head out the door as I was finishing up. "Oh, Jake, you're a dear. Thank you so much," she said, her voice a soft whisper. She glanced nervously toward Carol's house. "Your grandmother always did the same. Just be careful where you put the snow." "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning on my shovel. "Carol has ideas about it," she said conspiratorially. "She believes in equitable snow distribution." "Don't ask me what it means. Just be careful." She gave me a quick, grateful smile and disappeared back inside. Equitable snow distribution. I muttered the words to myself. It sounded like something out of a dystopian novel. I'd just shoveled the snow into neat piles along the edge of my lawn. What could possibly be wrong with that? 2 days later, I found out. An email with the subject line, "Urgent Winter Weather Protocol Update," landed in the inbox of every Pleasant Valley resident. It read, "Dear residents, in the interest of maintaining winter curb appeal and ensuring uniform snow melting patterns for the health of our community's lawns, a new protocol is being enacted, effective immediately. All snow cleared from driveways and private walkways must be piled on the resident's own property. Furthermore, to create a harmonious and aesthetically pleasing winterscape, these piles must be formed into a neat, conical mound. Said mound must be located on the north-facing side of your front lawn only, no less than 10 feet from the curb. Your cooperation is essential for a beautiful and orderly winter. Thank you. Carol, HOA President." I read the email 3 times. My jaw hung open. A neat, conical mound? On the north-facing side? I looked out my window. My house faced west. I didn't have a north-facing side of my front lawn. The only part of my property that was technically north-facing was a tiny strip of grass right next to my basement foundation, right next to the basement egress window. I forwarded the email to Gus with the subject line, "You are not going to believe this." His reply came back 5 minutes later. "Kid, I told you. Satan's sister. Good luck with your cone." I stood there, staring at the email, then at my lawn. This was no longer about rules. This was a targeted, strategic campaign of psychological warfare. And the beige dictator was just getting warmed up. The weather reports started a week in advance. A historic nor'easter, a snowpocalypse, a bomb cyclone. Every meteorologist on every channel was practically giddy with impending doom. They promised 2 feet of snow, maybe more, coupled with high winds and bone-chilling temperatures. The governor declared a state of emergency before the first flake had even fallen. For most people, it was a cause for stocking up on bread and milk. For me, it was a source of deep, existential dread. This wasn't just a storm. This was the final boss battle. This was the snow cone showdown I'd been dreading ever since Carol's insane email. Gus called me the day before the storm hit. "You got that beast in the garage gassed up?" he asked, his voice crackling over the phone. "The Vesuvius is ready for deployment," I confirmed grimly. Good. 'Cause you know she's gonna be watching. The beige dictator lives for this crap. It's her Super Bowl. Just remember what I told you. Document everything. The snow started around 8 p.m., soft and silent at first. By midnight, it was a howling, horizontal blizzard. I stood at my living room window, watching the world disappear under a thick, relentless tide of white. The streetlights cast eerie, diffused glows, illuminating the swirling chaos. There was a strange beauty to it, but I couldn't appreciate it. All I could think about was the coming morning and the inevitable confrontation. All I could see was Carol, rule book in one hand, measuring tape in the other, ready to enforce her reign of terror. I went to bed feeling like a soldier on the eve of a battle he knows he can't win by playing fair. I woke up to an almost profound silence. The world was muffled, buried. I crept to the window and peered out. It was even worse than predicted. A solid 2 feet, maybe more, of heavy, wet snow blanketed everything. My car was just a white lump in the driveway. The street was gone. It was a pristine, untouched canvas of winter. But it wasn't untouched for long. My eyes were drawn to a single figure moving through the deep snow across the street. It was Carol. And she wasn't clearing her own property. I moved to the kitchen window for a better view, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. There she was, bundled in a pristine white snowsuit that made her look like the world's most irritating Michelin man. She was wielding her own snowblower, a pathetic little electric thing that whined like a dying mosquito. It was no match for this kind of snow, but she was persistent. And she was malicious. She wasn't clearing her driveway. She wasn't clearing her sidewalk. She was clearing the common pathway that ran between our properties. And with a deliberate, methodical precision that chilled me to the bone, she was aiming the chute of her puny machine directly at my house. The snow, heavy and wet, flew in a clumsy arc and splattered against my foundation, pile after pile. She was working her way down the path, creating a massive, dense drift right along the side of my house, right over the one spot I'd identified as my only north-facing option, right over my basement's egress window, my fire exit. I stood there, clutching a cold coffee mug, and just watched. This wasn't about aesthetic harmony or uniform melting patterns anymore. This wasn't about a stupid rule in a stupid book. This was a direct, calculated act of spite. She was using her own twisted logic, her own insane rule, as a weapon. She was burying my emergency exit under a mountain of snow and daring me to do something about it. The rage that started building in me was a pure, clean thing. It was a white-hot flame that burned away all the petty annoyance and weary frustration of the past few months. In that moment, I saw Carol not as a ridiculous busybody, but as a genuine menace. What if the furnace malfunctioned? What if there was a fire? She was trapping me in my own home, and she was doing it with a smug little smile on her face that I could see even from across the street. My mind raced. I could call the cops. But what would they do? Tell us to be nice? It was a civil matter. I could call the fire department, and they'd probably take it seriously. But it would take time. I could try to appeal to the HOA board, a collection of spineless sycophants who probably thought subtle taupe was a bold color choice. Bureaucracy, rules, procedures. That was her world. That was her weapon. But I had a weapon too. My eyes drifted from the window, through the kitchen, and toward the door to the garage. I pictured it sitting there, gleaming, orange, powerful. The Vesuvius 3000. Grandma's legacy. I set my mug down on the counter with a firm click. There are moments for bureaucracy, I said aloud to the quiet house. And there are moments for immediate, decisive, two-stroke engine-powered solutions. I smiled. A real, genuine smile. "This," I said, turning toward the garage, "is the ladder." The garage door rattled as I heaved it open. The Vesuvius sat there like a patient predator. I checked the gas. Full. I flipped the choke, primed the engine. I grabbed the starter cord, wrapped it around my hand, and gave it one single furious pull. The engine didn't just start. It exploded into life with a deafening, garage-shaking roar. It was the sound of 1,000 angry hornets, the scream of a banshee, the guttural bellow of a machine built for one purpose: to move massive quantities of frozen water with extreme prejudice. I didn't just hear the roar. I felt it in my teeth, in my bones. It was a scream of liberation. I wheeled the orange beast out onto the driveway. The deep snow parted before it like the Red Sea. Across the street, Carol stopped. Her little electric whiner was completely drowned out. She just stood there, a look of pure shock on her face as I rolled my weapon into position. She had built a mountain against my house. It was at least 4 feet high, packed tight against the foundation, completely obscuring the fire exit. A monument to her pettiness. I wasn't going to shovel it. I wasn't going to blow it into the street. That would be a violation. I wasn't going to pile it on my own lawn. That would be playing her game. No, the solution had to be elegant. It had to be poetic. It had to be final. I aimed the discharge chute. Not down, not sideways. I aimed it up, high into the crisp morning air, angled just slightly to the left, directly toward her house, directly toward the meticulously manicured, award-winning prize rose bushes that flanked her front porch, their delicate branches now encased in ice. I looked at her one last time. She was still frozen, watching me. I gave her a small, polite nod. Then I pushed the throttle to full. The effect was instantaneous and biblical. The Vesuvius didn't just move the snow, it devoured it. The massive auger chewed through the packed drift, and the high-speed impeller launched it skyward in a thick, glorious plume of white. It was a geyser of pure, unadulterated revenge. The snow shot 50 feet into the air, a beautiful, arcing testament to superior engineering, catching the morning sunlight like a cloud of diamonds. For a moment, it hung there, a majestic white rainbow stretching from my property to hers. And then gravity took over. The plume descended, not in a gentle dusting, but in a concentrated, heavy downpour. It completely, utterly buried her prize-winning rose bushes. It covered the front of her house. It created a brand new, even larger drift right on her perfectly manicured HOA-compliant lawn. I worked my way along the foundation, the engine screaming its triumphant song. The entire mountain of snow against my house was gone. In less than 4 minutes, my fire exit was clear. My foundation was free. I pulled back the throttle, cut the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. It was deafening. It was the most satisfying silence I had ever heard in my life. It was broken only by a single, sputtering gasp from across the street. Mission accomplished. I knew the call had been made. There was no way Carol would let this stand. I calmly wheeled the Vesuvius back into the garage, its engine ticking as it cooled. I grabbed my phone and walked back to the scene of the crime. Or, from my perspective, the scene of the righteous cleansing. I took several clear, well-lit photos. The now completely clear egress window, the faint outline of where the massive drift had been, and a wide shot showing the proximity to the common path she had been clearing. Evidence. Gus's words echoed in my head. Document everything. I had just finished when a police cruiser slid quietly to a stop at the curb. 2 officers emerged, their movements slow and heavy in the deep snow. They had the weary, put-upon expressions of men who had been dealing with stupid people all morning and knew, with absolute certainty, that this was not going to be the call that turned their day around. Just then, Gus's F-150 rumbled up the street, and parked behind the cruiser. He'd seen the flashing lights and, smelling drama like a shark smells blood, had decided to make an appearance. He got out, nursing a large coffee, and leaned against his truck to watch the show. Carol was already on her porch, gesticulating wildly, her face red with fury. "He assaulted me!" she shrieked as the officers approached. "He assaulted me with snow! He's a menace! He destroyed my property! Look!" She pointed a trembling, mitten-clad finger at the fresh, white tomb where her rose bushes used to be. "My prize-winning roses buried!" The taller officer, whose name tag read Miller, sighed a sigh so deep it seemed to come from the very core of his soul. "Ma'am, let's calm down. Did he throw the snow at you? Did any of it hit your person?" "It was a deliberate attack, a snow-based assault." I stepped forward, holding my hands up in a placating gesture. "Officers, my name is Jake Miller. I live here," I said calmly. "Perhaps I can shed some light on the situation." I presented my phone. "This is what my house looked like 5 minutes ago," I said, showing them the pictures. "As you can see, this woman, our HOA president, deliberately used her snowblower to block my basement fire exit with a massive snowdrift. That's a serious safety violation, not to mention incredibly dangerous." Officer Miller took the phone and studied the pictures. His partner, Davis, walked over to my foundation, looked down at the clearly marked egress window, and then looked at the snow piled on Carol's side of the property. He shook his head slowly. "I was simply following the HOA protocol for snow placement," Carol insisted. "The conical mound must be on the north-facing side." "Your fire exit is on the north-facing side?" Davis asked me, his tone flat. "It's the only part of my property that is, according to her interpretation," I said. Gus decided it was his time to contribute. "Can confirm, officer," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Saw the whole thing. She was piling it up good and high, total hazard. Watched her do it myself." Officer Miller handed me back my phone. He looked from me to Carol, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, blocking a fire exit is a public safety hazard. We take that a lot more seriously than buried rose bushes. You created a dangerous situation. Mr. Miller rectified it." "But my roses," she sputtered. "He had to put the snow somewhere, ma'am," Davis said, his patience clearly gone. "He put it back where it came from. Seems fair to me." They gave Carol a stern, official warning about obstructing emergency access points and the potential legal ramifications. They didn't even look at me again, other than a brief, almost imperceptible nod from Miller as they got back in their cruiser. It was the universal cop signal for, "You're not the crazy one here." As they drove away, Carol stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had been beaten, publicly and decisively. She spun around and slammed her front door. Total victory. My victory lap was short-lived. The next afternoon, an email blast went out. Emergency HOA board meeting to discuss recent flagrant violations of community standards and the malicious destruction of private property. It was scheduled for that evening at the community clubhouse. She wasn't giving up. If she couldn't win with the law, she'd win with her own law. My phone rang. It was Brenda. "Jake, I just saw the email," she said, her voice a nervous flutter. "You have to go. You can't let her railroad you. She'll tell them all sorts of lies." "I don't know, Brenda. It seems pointless," I sighed. "No, it's not. People are tired of her, but they're scared. If you stand up to her, really stand up, things might change. I'll be there, for support." Her shaky courage was inspiring. "Okay, Brenda," I said. "Okay, I'll be there." The clubhouse was a sterile room that smelled of lemon cleaner and quiet desperation. The board consisted of Carol and 2 men who looked like they'd been dressed by their wives and would rather be anywhere else. About 10 other residents, including Brenda, were scattered in the audience. Carol began, her voice quivering with theatrical rage. She launched into a dramatic monologue, complete with a PowerPoint presentation featuring close-up CSI-style photos of her buried rose bushes from different angles. She called me a rogue, a vandal, a threat to the peaceful fabric of their community. She demanded the board levy the maximum possible fine against me for property damage, noise violations, and ungentlemanly conduct. When she finished, all eyes turned to me. The room was silent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I walked to the front of the room with a small stack of papers. Carol is right about one thing, I began calmly. There was a flagrant violation of community standards yesterday. A very dangerous one. I taped my own photo to the whiteboard. The picture of the massive snowdrift completely blocking my fire exit. This is what our HOA president, a person entrusted with our safety and well-being, spent her morning doing. She created a death trap. I have a printout here, I held it up, of the local fire code, Section 9, which explicitly forbids the obstruction of any emergency egress. The fine for which, by the way, is significantly more than $25. A murmur went through the small crowd. Brenda nodded emphatically. The two board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The question here isn't whether my snowblower is loud or where the snow ended up, I continued, making eye contact with every person in the room. The question is why the president of our HOA was using her time to create a life-threatening hazard on a resident's property. What if there had been a fire? What if my furnace had malfunctioned overnight and filled the house with carbon monoxide? If someone had been injured or killed, the liability wouldn't just be on me, it would be on her. It would be on the board. It would be on the entire homeowners association. I let the words hang in the air. I let them think about the lawsuits, about the insurance premiums. I didn't destroy her property maliciously. I cleared a fire exit that she illegally blocked. The snow had to go somewhere. I chose the point of origin. I looked directly at the two board members. So, you can either vote to fine me for saving my own life from a hazard your president created, or you can ask yourselves if Carol is truly fit to hold a position of leadership in this community. I sat down. The silence was thick. Carol was pale, her mouth a thin, hard line. One of the board members cleared his throat. "All those in favor of fining Mr. Miller?" he asked quietly. No one moved. Not a single hand went up. Brenda started a slow, deliberate clap. A second person joined in. Then another. The motion to fine me died without a second, suffocated by a round of tentative revolutionary applause. A week passed. The great snow of 24 began its slow, sloppy retreat, melting under a surprisingly warm sun. Gus and his crew, unbothered by any further complaints, put the finishing touches on my new deck. It was beautiful, sturdy, well-crafted, and stained a lovely, non-HOA-approved shade of cedar that I'd picked out myself. There had been no new violation notices, no passive-aggressive emails, nothing. It was a week of glorious, unnerving silence. I was sitting on the deck, my first time truly enjoying it, sipping a hot coffee in the crisp morning air. The world felt fresh, clean, and full of possibility. I saw a flicker of movement across the street. It was Carol, peering at me through her living room window. Our eyes met for a brief second. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated loathing. She didn't wave. She didn't smile her joyless smile. She just stared for a moment, then pointedly, dramatically, pulled her blinds shut. Just then, Brenda shuffled by on her morning walk. She didn't whisper this time. She beamed, a huge, genuine smile creasing her face, and gave me a very deliberate, enthusiastic thumbs up. I smiled back and raised my coffee mug in a salute. Later that afternoon, I was in the garage, wiping down the Vesuvius 3000 before putting it away for what I hoped would be a long time. It sat there, its orange paint job still impossibly bright. I gave its engine housing a fond pat. I thought about my grandmother and her advice about good tools. She was right. But I'd learned something else, too. I'd learned that a home isn't just a place you own. It's a place you have to defend. It's a place you have to make your own. Sometimes against opposition that is petty, irrational, and wields a rule book like a weapon. I looked out the open garage door at the quiet street, at the houses all painted in their approved shades of beige and taupe, and I looked at my own house, with its non-compliant mailbox and its glorious new deck. Sometimes, I thought to myself, to create a little peace and quiet for yourself, you first have to make a whole lot of noise. The house, finally, felt like home.